Hi, this is Jeremy. I'm going to show you how to do the exercises that go with a Math Antics lesson on adding and subtracting integers. Are you ready? Here we go. Our first problem is a fill in the blank, and it says adding a negative is the same as blank a positive. Now, this comes from what we called rule number 1 in the video, rule number 1, which says that adding a negative is the same as subtracting a positive. And what that rule means in math is that if you ever are adding a negative where you have a plus minus in a problem, like say you have the problem 1 plus -1, where you have a plus minus, you can just change that into subtraction, which is a problem you already know how to solve. So instead of 1 plus -1, you can just say 1 minus 1. And that's easy to work out. You know the answer to that's going to be 0. So rule number 1 shows us that adding a negative is the same as subtracting a positive. And the next problem is also fill in the blank. It says subtracting a negative is the same as blank a positive. Now this comes from rule number 2 in the video. Rule number 2 says that subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. And what that means in math is that if you ever have a negative or a double negative where you're subtracting a negative, like 1 minus -1, then you can change that to adding. You can change it to 1 plus 1. Addition, which that's an easy problem also. We know the answer to that is 2. So rule number 2 shows us that subtracting a negative is the same as adding a positive. For our next problem, we actually get to try doing some integer addition and subtraction. But before we start, I want to make sure you know this is a pretty confusing subject for a lot of students. And even for people who are really good at math, it's easy to lose track of what signs you're dealing with. There's so many different combinations that it's really easy to get confused about it. So if you are confused or if you're struggling with integer addition and subtraction, don't get discouraged about it. Just keep practicing, keep trying problems. Watch the video a few more times, and eventually you'll get it. Okay, so let's start with this first problem, which is 10 plus -6. Now we're going to use the strategy that we learned in the video where we start by asking, what are we starting with? Are we starting with positive or negative? And you can see here that we're starting with positive 10. There's no negative out in front of it, so this is 10 and it's positive 10. So we're going to be starting on the positive side of the number line. And using a basic number line is a really good way to kind of get a feel for what's happening in a problem like this. So draw a basic number line. We have 0 in the middle, and this is the positive side, and this is the negative side. So we're starting off with positive 10, which we'll say is about here on the number line, this side of the positive side here. So we'll draw an arrow. That'll represent what we're starting with, positive 10. Now, what are we doing to that? Are we going to make it bigger or smaller? Well, we're adding a negative. And so adding a negative is going to make it go in the negative direction, or it's going to make it smaller. We learned in rule number 1 that adding a negative is the same as subtracting. So whenever you see that plus minus, you can just switch it to minus. So we can also think about this problem as just 10 minus 6. And that's something you're really familiar with. So we're going to be going minus 6 down the other direction off of this 10. And so it's going to be the difference between these two numbers, between 10 and 6. 10 minus 6, it's going to be the difference, which we all know is 4. 10 minus 6 is 4. So that's how we can apply our strategy and our rules in this case to make the problem 10 plus -6 into something we recognize and that we can figure out the answer is positive 4. The reason that the answer in this is positive is because we started on the positive side, and even though we made it more negative, we didn't go far enough to cross 0 and go over into the negative side. We started with 10, but we only took away 6 of that, so we're still left with a positive 4. For our next problem, we have 5 minus -5. Now let's use our strategy and start by asking, are we starting with a positive or a negative? Here you can see we're starting with positive 5. So let's get out a number line so we can visualize this. And we'll start over here on this side with positive 5. That's going to be our starting point. We can draw an arrow to represent positive 5 in that direction. Now we ask, are we making it bigger or smaller? Well, we're subtracting a negative. And if you remember from the video, rule number two says that subtracting a negative, whenever you have a minus minus, that's the same as adding a positive or adding. So whenever you see this minus minus in an integer problem like this, you want to right away think plus. Minus minus gives us plus. A double negative will become positive, and that changes this problem just into 5 plus 5. So really, we're starting with a positive, and we're going to make it more positive by adding 5 to it. It just was hard to see that initially because we had so many negatives in the problem. We had a double negative. But when we realized, because of rule number 2, that minus minus becomes a plus, we can see that this is what we called a case 1 problem, where it's just addition. We start with 5, we're getting 5 more. So 5 plus 5 gives us 10. Our answer is going to stay positive because we're staying on the positive side of the number line here. So 5 minus negative 5 is the same as 5 plus 5, which is just positive 10. And for our next problem, we have negative 2 minus 12. Okay, so we can see here now we're starting with a negative this time. We have a negative sign out in front of the 2, which is what we're starting with. So let's draw a number line over here so we can visualize this. Here's the positive side, negative side, and 0. So we're going to be starting with negative 2, maybe right down about here. We'll draw a little arrow showing that we're starting on the negative side of the number line. And now we ask, are we making it bigger or smaller? Which direction are we going to go in? Well, we're subtracting 12 from it, so subtracting a positive like this is going to make it go even more negative. We're going to go further down the number line by 12 more by subtracting 12 from it and end up down here. So as you can see, because we're combining these two negatives, we started with a negative 2, and we're getting even more negative. It's going to be the sum of these two values. We're going to have a negative 2 and then a negative 12. So we're going to end up with a negative 14, what you would get if you combine those two negatives. Down here it's going to be negative 14. So this is what in the video we called a case 3 problem, where we start with a negative and we make it more negative. So negative 2 minus 12 gives us negative 14. And now we have negative 1 plus negative 4. Okay, let's start by asking, what are we starting with? You can see here it's a negative 1. That's what we're starting with. So let's get out a number line so we can visualize this problem. 0, the positive side, the negative side, and we're starting with just a little bit of a negative, negative 1. We'll put it right about there. Small arrow to show that's where we're starting. And what are we doing to it? Are we making it bigger or smaller? Well, we're adding something to it, but we're adding a negative. So that's actually going to be making it smaller because we're adding a negative. Our rule number 1 says that when we're adding a negative, that's the same as subtracting something. So if we want, we could rewrite this problem, negative 1 minus 4. And either way it's written, what we're doing is we're starting with a negative number here, and we're making it more negative. We're adding a negative 4 or we're subtracting 4. Both of those are the same, and they mean we're going further down the negative side of the number line by a value of 4. So we're subtracting 4, and we're starting with a negative 1. So these two negative values are going to combine. We're going to have a negative 1 and a negative 4 combining, which means we're going to get a total of negative 5. Their number values are going to add because the two arrows are going in the same direction. It's going to give us a negative answer, more of a negative answer down here at negative 5. And so we're staying on the negative side of the number line, and negative 1 plus negative 4 gives us negative 5. In our next problem, we have negative 11 plus 2. So in this case, we're starting with a negative number again. We're starting with negative 11. Let's put that on our number line here. We'll start on the negative side of the number line with a pretty big negative number, negative 11 here. So we'll draw kind of a long arrow. This will be negative 11. That's where we're starting with, this negative. And what are we doing to that? Well, we're adding positive 2. So we're going to be making it bigger, or making it go in the positive direction. We're going to be making it go in the positive direction like this by an amount of 2. So plus 2. So you can see we're starting here down at negative 11, but we're going to be getting less negative. We're going to be going more towards the positive direction. Now how much? Well, only 2, so we're not going to make it even all the way up to 0. So our answer is still going to be negative. That's one thing we know about this problem, is our answer is still going to be negative because we would need a positive 11 to make us go all the way back up to 0, and we need it to be more than positive 11 for us to end up here on the positive side of the number line. So we're still going to be negative. The question is, how much? Well, we started with negative 11, and we're putting 2 back onto it, so it's going to be the difference between 11 and 2. The difference because the arrows are going in different directions. This one towards the negative, this one towards positive, and the difference between 11 and 2 is 9. So we're actually going to end up here with a final answer of negative 9. So this is, in the video, this is a type of problem that we called a case 4 problem, which is where you're starting with a negative number, but then you're making it more positive. And in this case, our answer is negative 9. And for our next problem, we have 8 plus negative 14. So in this case, we're starting with a positive. We're starting with positive 8. So we'll draw our number line. And we'll say that positive 8 is right about here, plus 8. So we can draw an arrow to represent what we're starting with. We're starting with positive 8. And what are we doing to it? Well, we're adding a negative. And rule number 2 says that adding a negative is the same as subtracting. So one way to think about this is that we're starting with positive 8, but then we're subtracting 14 from it. So we're going to be going in the other direction by an amount 14. So let's put our other arrow here that shows we're going to be subtracting 14 from that starting positive 8. And as you can see, what's going to happen here, we're starting with only 8 and we're trying to subtract more than we have. We're starting with 8 and subtracting 14. And you used to think, probably before you knew about negative numbers, that you couldn't do that. You can't take away a bigger number from a smaller one. But you actually can. It just means that our answer is going to switch to the negative side. We're going to go right past 0 and we're going to end up on the negative side of the number line. The question is, where on the negative side? If we had subtracted exactly 8, we would have gotten to 0. 8 minus 8 would be 0, but we're subtracting more than that. So we're going to take the difference between these two numbers, between the 14 and the 8, and the difference between those is 6. So there would be an amount 6 down here that's the difference between those two arrows, and that's going to be the number part of our answer, and we know it's going to be negative because we tried to take away more than we had. We started with 8, and we took away more than that. We took away 14, so we're going to end up with negative 6 for our answer. In our next problem, we have negative 9 minus negative 7. So we have a lot of negatives in this problem, and we can see here that we're starting out with a negative, negative 9. So let's draw our number line again so that we can visualize what's happening in this problem. We're starting with a negative 9, so that's going to be down about here somewhere. We'll put negative 9, and this arrow will represent that amount we're starting with. Okay, now what are we doing to it? Well, we're subtracting a negative from it. We remember from the video that in rule number 2, it says that subtracting a negative is the same as adding something. We can just change this to addition. So we can think of this problem as negative 9 plus 7. That's just another way to write it. And that helps us to see that what's happening here is we're not taking something away, we're actually making it bigger. We're going to be going in the other direction by the amount 7. So we're going to have a plus 7 here. So we're going to be starting with a negative 9 on this side, and then we're going to be going positive by 7. Now we need to ask, is our answer going to be positive, negative, or 0? Well, we didn't quite make it back up to 0 here. We would have needed to add 9 back onto the negative 9 to get all the way up to 0. So we know it's not going to be positive or 0. We know our answer is going to be negative. We're going to stay on the negative side of the number line here. And since our arrows are going in different directions, we know that the number part is going to be the difference between these. We started with 9, but we're taking 7 off of that, so we have the difference between these. And 9 minus 7 is going to be 2. So starting with negative 9, we're going to go up 7, and it's going to get us almost to 0. It's going to get us to negative 2, but not quite to 0. So negative 2 is going to be our final answer for this problem. And if you want a reference in the video, this is what we call a case 4 problem, where we're starting with a negative, but then we're going to make it more positive. And the answer to this problem is -2. And for our last problem, we have 5 minus -10. All right, so we're starting with a positive number this time, +5. So we'll put that on our number line over here, starting on the positive side with +5. Okay, and what are we doing to it? Well, we're subtracting a negative, and anytime you see this minus minus, remember, think plus. That's because rule number 2 says subtracting a negative is the same as adding positive. So when you see minus minus, just think plus. So we're starting with +5, and then we're going to be adding 10 to it. So we're going to be making it bigger. We're going to be going more in the positive direction here. Start with +5, add +10, and we all know how to do that. 5 plus 10 is just going to give us +15. Stays positive because we stay on the positive side of the number line. And this is what we call in the video case 1 problem. But lots of times it can be written when you're doing integer addition and subtraction. You might see it written like this. It's kind of disguised with this double negative. So when you see that, think positive, and you'll get the right answer. In this case, 5 minus -10, 15.